Today we're going to be making the Indiana puzzle quilt block. So this quilt block is super fun. It's got a lot of movement, but it really isn't that hard to make because in the center we have a square and a square block, and around the side is just half square triangles, just arranged in different orientations so that it gives it a lot of movement. And as you can see here, I've got a couple different sizes. I've got this one right here, 6 inches. This one is 9 inches, and the one we are going to be making will be 12 inches. So in the description, I will have a link to a printable if you would like to have a printable that you can look at and reference to make the different sizes. Let's get started with the fabric that we need, and I've pre-cut this so it's ready to go. So you're going to need 2 squares of fabric. These are 10 inches square. So you'll need 2 of those, and I've got a background color and then I've got a blue color. So that's that, and then we'll set those aside because we're going to work on those in a minute. For our center square, this is going to be for the center right here, the square and a square unit. We're going to need 1 block that is 4.5 inches square, and this is the background color, and then we'll need 4 squares, and these are 2.5 inches of the blue color. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take our blue squares. I've got just a piece of paper here. I'm just going to draw a line on the back from corner to corner on each square. Now you don't have to do this. Especially if they're smaller, it's easy to eyeball it. But if you want to be really precise, then you can just draw this line from corner to corner on each square. So I'm just going to do that. This is a little hard to see with this dark blue, but at the sewing machine I'll be able to see it good enough. Okay. Okay, so next we're going to take our square here. This is 4.5 inches, and we're going to take 2 of our blue squares. Now we're going to place them so they're right sides together. So this background piece is right side up, and then we will flip our blue square so that it's right side down, and then we see the line that we drew on the back. So we're going to place one on one corner, and we'll place the other on the other corner. We're going to have the lines parallel to each other, and then we will go to the sewing machine and we will stitch. All right, so you can see I've got the stitching done, maybe just along here and along here. So the next thing we'll do is we will just trim off those pieces. So I'll grab my cutting mat. I'm just going to place my ruler, and on the edge of the ruler, most quilting rulers along the edge will have a 1/4 inch marking. So you can use any ruler that has one of those, and I just line up that 1/4 inch marking right along the seam that I just sewed, and then we will trim off that little corner piece. Then we'll flip it and do the same thing on the other side. So then we have this, okay? The next thing we'll do is we'll just take our iron and we will press these open. So I'll just go ahead and set the seam and then press that open. All right, so then we will just place our remaining squares in these corners that don't have anything in them yet. And then we will sew along these lines, make sure that they are parallel to each other, and we'll just sew along those lines just like we did before. Okay, so we have these last 2 sewn on, and we will just repeat. Couldn't find my ruler. We'll just repeat the same process of trimming off these triangles, just a 1/4 inch away from that seam, just like that, and then again we will press the pieces open. All right, so this is our center block. This is the square and the square. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to be making our half square triangles. So we're going to be making 8 at a time. So we'll just take our 2 squares, these are 10 inches, and we'll place them right sides together. Actually, before we do that, let's mark this one up. This is where your longer ruler will come in handy. And I like to have a piece of paper so I don't draw on my mat, but it's not quite long enough for this, so I'll just try to be careful. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm taking this 1/4 of an inch line, I'm lining it up from corner to corner. So the corner is lined up at the 1/4 inch line on the top and the bottom. And then I will just take my pencil and draw a line down the side. Then I'll flip it around and repeat the same thing. So what this is going to do is going to create the lines that we sew on. Well, a lot of times when I see instructions for half square triangles, they have you just draw a line and then sew a 1/4 of an inch away from that center line. And that's not very helpful to me because you're on a diagonal and it's hard to see if you're a 1/4 of an inch away as you're sewing right in the middle and everything. I think it's much easier to just draw the lines where you're going to actually be sewing. So it takes maybe a little bit longer because you're drawing 2 lines instead of 1, but it's just so much more precise because you're going to sew right on the line and not have any guesswork. So we'll take our blue piece, this is right side up, then our background piece is right side down. Then we will take this over to the sewing machine and we will just stitch along all of the lines that we drew. So we'll stitch 2 lines right here and 2 lines right here. Okay, so here we have our squares with the lines sewn. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our cutting mat, we're just going to line this up. We're going to be cutting this into 8 pieces. So to do this, you're just going to take your ruler and you're going to line it up in the center. So I like to line up the block along the mat so that the lines are so that it's square. Then I can set this on, and I can see from here to here it's lining up. I can see it's lining up on the lines, and then I know that it's going to be a straight cut. Okay, so we'll cut it in half this way, and just try to keep your pieces in the same place and not let them move as you move your ruler. Then we'll just do the same thing on this side. And we'll just line up along these lines right here, make sure the block is lined up along the edge, line up the ruler with the points at the seams, and then we will just cut horizontally like that. And then lastly, we will just cut from corner to corner, both directions. Okay, and so then you will have your half square triangles. Now before we do anything, I'd just like to trim them up. So I lost my ruler again. These are going to be 4.5 inches. So I intentionally made the squares just slightly big enough that we could trim them down. I find that it's really hard to get like perfect, exact, precise half square triangles just from sewing. I always try to make them just a tiny bit bigger and then trim them down. So then this is perfectly a 4.5 inch half square triangle. So this ruler here is pretty handy. It has different markings along it. So this side is like 2, 3, 4, 5. This side is the 1/2 inches. And if you need a different size, there's even these markings that they're not labeled, but they are marked all the different down to 1/8 of an inch. So basically what I'm going to do is take this 4.5 inch line, I'm laying it on the seam right there. And then I'll just take, once that's in place, then I just trim off the excess around the ruler. And that just gives you your perfect square. So we'll just finish trimming these up. Okay, so the next step is to press these blocks open, and I always just like to press towards the dark fabric. So if you lay the light color down and then lift up like that, then and press towards that direction, then your seam will go towards that direction that you flipped up. So whatever is on top is the way the seam will press towards. If sometimes it doesn't matter. This one, it doesn't really matter as far as nesting seams, which direction they're going, but I do just like to press towards the darker side just so that this dark color won't peek through as much on the light background color. Okay, so we've got our half square triangles all flattened out. So the last thing we'll need to do is just trim off these little tails. And I just like to do that with a pair of scissors. Just quick clip those off real quick. All right, so we have all our half square triangles ready to go, and we have our centerpiece, the square and a square. So this will be the center. So we're just going to lay out the block at this point. So this is the center. Then we're going to work our way around this square in a circle. So it's helpful to have something to look at. So go ahead and grab that printable that I've created if you'd like. But you're going to take the first two blocks starting at the top, center. You're going to take the first two. You're going to orient them so that the blue is in the top left corner. Okay, so then we will work our way down this way, and we will move the block so that the blue is the top right corner, and these two will be oriented that way. Then we'll work our way over here, and then we will have these blocks with the blue on the bottom right, like this. Slide this up just a little bit. Okay, and then our last two blocks here, we will have the blue oriented towards the bottom left. So you can see it just has a lot of movement. So it's a little tricky sometimes to keep everything as they go. So as I'm sewing, I'm going to be double checking each time I sew things together that they're still how I want them to be. So I don't have to do a lot of unpicking, although that has happened. Okay, so we've got our block laid out, and we're going to be sewing this like a 9 patch. So we will just sew these 3 pieces and make a row. Then we'll sew these 3 pieces and make a row, and then we'll sew these 3 pieces to make a row. So there we have all of our rows sewn together. Another way that you can just make sure that everything's lined up right is these center pieces will create this friendship star look. So that's just another way to double check that things are right. So before we sew the strips together, we're going to press them. And I'm just going to press the top and the bottom towards the middle. So I'm just going to take it and I'm going to lay it like this. Then I'm going to lift this up and press, and that will make the seam go towards the middle. And then we'll just repeat on this side. So we'll have it like this, fold it up, then we'll press. So then we'll do the same thing for our top piece. Okay, so you can see those seams are pressed towards the center. Now the next, the middle piece, we're going to have them press away from the center. So we will just take our piece and we will press from the middle out, just like this. Then that way the seams will be towards the middle. Now, I've talked about this before, but the reason we do this is so that we can nest our seams. So now let's make sure we get this in the right orientation again. Okay, I think that's right. So then we'll just flip this top piece over, and then you can see that when you line them up, the seams up, you'll have one seam allowance towards the left, the other will be towards the right, and they will just butt right up against each other, and then that's how you get the perfect points. So you can see, like on this one, like they just match up perfectly. So that's the trick that I use. I think that helps the most to get your seams lined up. I don't actually even use pins ever. I just butt those up together like that, and I use nesting seams as much as possible. So we'll just go to the sewing machine and we will sew along this line. Then we'll come back and we'll sew our bottom piece. Okay, so we have our block done, and the last thing we'll need to do is just press it open. So this block isn't hard, it is just paying attention to what you're doing each step, especially as you're putting the pieces together. I have had to unpick before because I wasn't paying attention, but as long as you get things oriented right and just are methodical about putting it together, it's not a hard block to do. So that's how you make the Indiana puzzle quilt block. So like I said, this is the 12-inch size. Go ahead and check out that printable in the description if you'd like to make a 9-inch or a 6-inch block, or the 12. All the size dimensions, the cut sizes will be on that printable. So thanks for watching.